Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Tharandter Rampe route in TSW2, or should I say the incredibly laggy Tharandter Rampe route. Wouldn't be the first time. Anyway, today we are at Dresden Hauptbahnhof, and we're going to be driving this Talent 2 from here to Tharandt and back on an S-Bahn S3 service, even though in real life the Talent 2s don't run on the Dresden S-Bahn. And this is the sort of consist that you would expect to see on a real S3 service. It's the BR442 electric locomotive with two Doppelstockwagen coaches. But for some reason, every time I try driving the BR143 on this service, the game crashes when I'm getting very, very close to Dresden on the return trip. And it's incredibly disheartening when you've essentially wasted all that time for a stupid glitch that never seems to get fixed. Although I seem to have tried this with the Talent 2, well, I've tried this run with the Talent 2 before and it seems to have worked, so I figured I'd try this again. And the other thing is that I find myself to be a lot better at driving multiple units like this compared to the locomotive, or especially something as convoluted as the BR143. Anyway, this will be a relatively this should be a relatively short run. Should only be about 22 minutes each way, and we'll be calling at 5 intermediate stations. The first one being Dresden Plauen. Let me just switch on here before I potentially forget later. I think the only place that I know of where you can find Talent 2s on S-Bahn service is in Leipzig. On that system it's called S-Bahn Deutschland. So I do apologise for the awkward silence, but I'm actually very, very annoyed after all the hassle I've had to go through just to get to this point. Like a couple of restarts of the computer and mistakes on initial recordings. It's just been a complete mess. Anyway, there's a pair of BR612s. Yeah, so as we depart Dresden Hauptbahnhof, we do very soon quickly part ways with the line out towards Dresden Neustadt and eventually Riesa. And the next landmark, if you can really call it that, is this yard, which I think is called Dresden Altstadt. There's usually some locomotives and other locomotives and coaches in here, though for whatever reason there's always electrics that have spawned in on non-electrified sidings, and I would have thought that, well, mind you, I suppose it could be moved around by a diesel, but that does still seem stupid to have electrics and non-electrified sidings like this. There's a couple of BR143s and a BR182. Now, I think last time I tried recording this, on this far side of the yard, there was a silver Talent 2 on this track, but this time it's now a BR143 and a 612 to boot. Going to see if we can get a screenshot of the Talent 2 passing by without breaking the speed limits. BR612, of course, being that tilting DMU that comes with this route. And incidentally, so does the BR143. That diesel off to the right there, and I think in the distance there on our right you can just about see the silver rail pull. Yeah, that is the silver rail pull BR185/6, which also comes with this route. And those textures shouldn't be glitching. There's a very loud buzzing. It's like what you hear on the Martangi EMUs in Wellington when they're sitting idle. Anyway, I'm hoping that this will... You can't see it, of course, but I've got fingers crossed that this run will actually be successful and I'll be able to get this lot back to Dresden Hauptbahnhof successfully. Incidentally, I've just remembered that this Dresden to Chemnitz route is set in 2012, which was only a year, like 1 year after the Talent 2's first entered service. So if this sort of operation was any bit realistic, where you're using a Talent 2 on the S3 line, I can imagine that people would see it as an incredible experience with the real state-of-the-art train. And yeah, the Talent 2s are certainly quite fancy units in the sense that they're very modern. And speaking of which, yesterday, in case you missed it, I did this video that I actually quite enjoyed making, where I compared, or did a little bit of a comparison between the train simulator and TSW2 versions of the Talent 2. Suffice to say, I prefer the TSW2 version. If I remember to do so, I'll put the link to that video in the top right corner. Right, well, it says to wait until 10:12 exactly, but I will not do that, because in all honesty, I've been faffing around with this game trying to get it to work right almost all day, and frankly, as much as I'm enjoying this run, I just want to be done with it. So yeah, we'll be a bit rebellious and leave about 30 seconds early. I find that with this Talent 2, trying to set the brakes so that you stop in really incredibly precise spots is a lot easier than with a locomotive, or if you're driving from the cab car end. I mean, it might be something to do with the fact that this thing has got a combined throttle and brake lever, whereas of course the BR442 and Doppelstockwagen cab car certainly don't have either, or certainly don't have the combined lever. Although curiously, I'm seeing just to the right of the driver's desk, you can't see it too well because the HUD's in the way, it looks like there's another brake lever. Let's see what that is. Indirect brake. Okay, I'm not sure what that is or how it's meant to work, but I wonder if it's like the Talent 2's equivalent of something like an independent brake, like we get on an American diesel locomotive, where you've got the main train brake as well as the independent brake, with the independent brake only controlling the brakes on the locomotive, not the wagons or coaches behind. Although, come to think of it, an independent brake wouldn't really make sense on a multiple unit, which is neither a locomotive nor, well, I suppose it really is a coach, self-propelled coach is. But one thing's for sure is that a multiple unit is definitely not a locomotive. One thing I always like about the Talent 2 is that really strange horn, which I think is prototypical, because I remember watching a video of a real Talent 2 speeding by, and I think the driver very suddenly blasted the horn. And from my experiences on not just this route, but also Riesa to Dresden and Köln to Aachen, and of course the rapid transit in Leipzig, the Talent 2 is quite a good unit to drive, and I do like how Dovetail have gone to the effort of adding in, of making proper changes in terms of details between each of the different variants. Because whilst there are three different Talent 2s in the game, or in other words, while the Talent 2 is featured in 3 routes, each variant is distinctly different from the other 2. Obviously, there's the original, the first version to come out, which was with rapid transit, and that's in a silver livery with green doors, and that's a 3-car unit. Even though in real life, the S-Bahn Deutschland also uses 4-car Talent 2s in that same livery, so I'm not sure why Dovetail only modelled the 3-car variant. And then with Schnellfahrstrecke Köln to Aachen, we've also got a standard 4-car DB Regio variant, which from memory only has one set of doors on each side, or the coaches each have only one set of doors on each side. Whereas curiously, the Leipzig version, or Mittel Deutschland, I'll probably just keep calling it Leipzig, simply because that's a bit easier to say. That variant has, well, the centre coach on that variant has 2 sets of doors on each side. Presumably because it's optimised for higher density suburban services, which I would imagine would be a bit more intense than something like this run that we're on today. And then the third and most recent variant of the Talent 2 that was brought to TSW is this one, a 3-car unit in the red livery, except this one is of course different from the Leipzig version because it only has that 1 door on each side of the centre coach, which I can't help thinking is not very efficient. Because you would normally the trains or multiple units or whatever that I see here in New Zealand, they all have at least 2 sets of doors on each side, which is certainly an arrangement that's certainly ideal for commuter services where there's loads of passengers and you want to reduce the amount of time the train spends stopped at a station as much as you possibly can. Heck, I think I've just remembered there's some German EMUs like the BR442, BR423. They have 3 sets of doors on each side. Yeah, they're definitely designed for higher density services than even the Talent 2s. And I've just realised that whilst the Talent 2's obviously got very good acceleration and braking, and can easily do 160 kilometres an hour, but A, we're not going to be getting anywhere near 160 this morning. B, I think the timetable that we're running to is just the same one that's used for the BR143s. So I would have thought that timetable would have factored in how quickly the BR143 can speed up and slow down. Because with the Talent 2, obviously we're generally arriving at these stations a bit earlier than I was thinking, although that's probably to do with me being a little bit impatient. So I'm trying not to hang around at these stations for too long, if at all. This one is Freital Deuben, if I'm saying that right, which I'm probably not. And as always, I apologise for any mispronunciation of German names. I'm surprised that the destination display is able to read S3 Tharandt. As I've said earlier, I'm pretty sure that the Talent 2s do not run Dresden S-Bahn services in real life. It's usually, if not, as we saw earlier, it's usually, if not always, the Doppelstockwagen coaches with a locomotive at one end, which I find is quite unusual for an S-Bahn service, because normally they use multiple units, especially if these systems in like Hanover, Berlin or anything to go by. Speaking of which, I've remembered that there's on that Hamburg to Hanover route in Train Simulator, there is a small part of the Hanover S-Bahn that's represented. I think it's just the section between Hanover Hauptbahnhof and Hanover Flughafen, or airport. And I think Dovetail also made the BR424 EMU as an add-on for that route, and those are the units that I think used to run the Hanover S-Bahn. 424, I think, looks like, I think it's in the same family as the likes of the 422 through to 426. But the 424 strongly resembles the BR425, but I don't necessarily remember what the differences are between a 424 and a 425, especially since they both have the same door layout. And for the 424, that's a bit odd to me, because if that was a unit used on S-Bahn trains or services, and yet it didn't have as many doors as the 422 and 423, which you'll find in the 422 you'll find in places like Wuppertal and Essen. And as for the 423, you can find that in like Stuttgart. I realise that I'm missing a stopping point, but too late to do anything about that, unfortunately. Yeah, you can find the 423 in like Frankfurt am Main, Stuttgart, Köln, where else? München, and possibly Essen as well, because obviously Essen is also on the S-Bahn Rhein-Ruhr, just like Köln. Anyway, this is Freital Hainsberg West, which I always remember as being a spot where, for whatever reason, where there's this connection with the narrow gauge line, and Dovetail actually bothered to model this narrow gauge coach, which they've just copied and pasted several times over. And it begs the question: it's like, if they can go to the effort of modelling a whole coach, why are they not doing a German narrow gauge route? There's so many missed opportunities with TSW, it's not funny. And I think one of them, or I reckon one that Dovetail could certainly do, is German narrow gauge, like with one of their, I think it's like, 210-2 steam locomotives? Or just, I wouldn't mind seeing a German narrow gauge route complete with steam. Especially since Dovetail have confirmed that they're making a steam era route for TSW, but I'm actually very hesitant to buy it because I really just don't have that much of an interest in late 1960s British Railways steam, especially in the northwest of England. It's just such a boring cop-out choice. Like, surely, I mean, I would have rather they go for something like, I don't know, Guildford to Portsmouth in the Southern Railway era, complete with the Hayling Island branch, or hell, even something like, I don't know, Salisbury to Exeter, complete with the branch line from Axminster to Lyme Regis, which would mean that they'd have to include the Adams radial tanks. Anyway, this is getting off topic as usual, so here we are on the approach into Freital Hainsberg West, and I always find myself, well, sometimes I find myself approaching the station too fast, because this station is so close to the previous one that sometimes, more often than not, it catches me off guard. And this is our last intermediate stop before Tharandt, and something I've neglected to mention this whole time is that this short form S3 service that we're running today is pretty much the normal S3 service, because during the off-peak period during the week and all throughout Saturdays and Sundays, the S3 service only goes as far as Tharandt, but during the morning and evening peak on weekdays, that's when the service is extended to Freiburg-Sachs. But from what I understand, generally throughout the whole day, it is a half-hourly S-Bahn service on the section between Dresden Hauptbahnhof and Tharandt, which is a similar frequency to line S1. And the curious thing is that I believe it's every hour you get the service that extends to Freiburg-Sachs, and it sort of alternates. It's sort of a pattern where one service departing Dresden will go all the way to Freiburg-Sachs, and then half an hour later another S3 will depart, but that will only go as far as Tharandt, and that just repeats itself a few times throughout the peak period. It's quite a curious operation, especially considering that the section from Dresden to Tharandt is actually fairly short, so much so that you can easily do this run as we're improving in less than 25 minutes. I'm just curious that they go to all this effort of running these services every half an hour over such a short section. Although presumably it's, for all I know, there's probably the passenger numbers is probably sufficient to justify that sort of operation. And I do find it curious how it's only during the evening, or only during the morning and evening peak, where the service does actually continue to Freiburg-Sachs. And then if you want to continue past there and onto Chemnitz, you'd have to go either on like the RB30 or IRE1 services. RB30 I think is run with the same consist as a regular S3, whereas the IRE1 that uses the BR442 diesel units that we saw earlier. And speaking of which, I always find that curious how Dovetail essentially made the BR442 the poster boy for advertising relating to this route, and yet the 612 is actually not a common sight on the route at all compared to just about everything else, because the whilst it certainly does run on this route in real life, and there are scenarios and timetable mode services available for the 612, the actual service that it runs between Chemnitz and Dresden only runs every 2 hours in each direction. So yeah, ironically, it's not a common sight at all. So anyway, we're finally, well, what feels like finally approaching Tharandt, which is this delightful little station that's nestled, well, appears to be nestled quite comfortably into a valley. And I haven't looked at this area on Google Maps, but I imagine it's not too densely populated. Mind you, this whole section between Dresden and Chemnitz doesn't feel it feels quite sparsely populated, which is not something I usually expect from a German route. And if anything, that's what this route is, really, is that if you're not familiar, or if you're mostly familiar with the more flat and level German routes, you ought to get Tharandter Rampe, on account of the fact that the geography, at least, is unlike, I think to me it's unlike any other German route we've had before. Just trying to get this right, because I want to try and get this. There we go. I might just use that one screenshot, the Talent 2 here at Tharandt, for the thumbnail. Anyway, now that we're here, so that was just one service, and this is obviously the menu that comes up when you finished a service. And 13.8 kilometres, yeah, that is really quite short. Yeah, I'll just try to get through this quickly. So I think it's left the doors open, so passengers can still get on board. But now we've got to change ends. Head back to Dresden. Wait a minute. Off. That should do it. So that'll hold the train. Well, mind you, even when the doors are open, I think this thing's got a setup where the brakes will be essentially locked and cannot be released when the doors are opened. And that's certainly a very important safety feature, because you wouldn't want the driver accidentally leaning his hand on the throttle when the train is stopped at a station and when the doors are still open. I hate to think what would happen. The good thing with these Talent 2s is that you can walk, as I've just demonstrated, you can walk through all the coaches, or the gangways are all open, just like the AM electric units in Auckland and the Martangi units in Wellington. Now I've just realised, what's the bit? I've just realised I forgot to check the tail lights at this end. Mind you, it's probably automatic, and I was right. Just thinking, it probably looked a bit silly if they used two of these units coupled together on one of these services. Although I think a 3-car unit like this, where it's only one story, might, to me, it's. I would have thought this would have less capacity than a pair of Doppelstockwagen coaches, but then again, I obviously don't know for certain. I could have left the doors open. Mind you, I suppose I'll just have to open them up again. I thought there was meant to be like a little ramp, little extension that would protrude outwards to kind of close the gap between the surface, or the platform surface, and the actual train. Especially when there's the section in the middle coach where there's the space for wheelchairs and things, or the disabled access, I mean. So good luck trying to get a wheelchair through a space that narrow. If anything, might be better to try this coming from this direction. I think the destination display should automatically change, but we'll just watch it anyway. It's curious, didn't change, but I suppose we could. What the hell? Oh no, there we go, it's now saying S3 to Dresden Hauptbahnhof. And that's good that we've got the green signal, because when I tried driving the 143 last time, I got held up at the station by a freight service, and I ended up leaving 4 minutes late. But this time I'm not going to make that, or not going to be in that same situation. It seems like to have any luck on doing a Dresden Hauptbahnhof to Tharandt round trip, you have to use less realistic motive power. Which, although incidentally, I wonder if the Talent 2's blasted chair. I wonder if the Talent 2's ever have actually run S-Bahn Dresden services in real life. Of course, I know that they're used, or around the Dresden area, they're used on regional services, especially out towards Leipzig and I think Hoyerswerda. Right, like Cottbus, is it the boat? Another place that the Talent 2s go to. Oh, yes, that's just remember that 60 speed limit that can potentially throw you for a loop. I've noticed there's a similar case like that with the surprise speed limits as you're heading out of Duisburg on Hauptstrecke Rhein-Ruhr going towards Bochum. So I've deliberately left early for this run for the reasons I said earlier. I want to just be done with this run. So I'm going to try and get at least one other video done today before essentially spending the whole afternoon doing nothing. Just screw it, let's see if we can get this thing to 120. Actually no, because I can already see the station there, and the platforms on these particular stations are a lot shorter than what I'm used to. So I think when I'm mainly driving S-Bahn services, it's usually out of either München or Cologne, where you've got an 8-car train, BR442s of course, and there's a little bit more room to come into the platform at a sizable speed. Mind you, I suppose with these platforms it wouldn't need to be too long if the only trains that ever really stop here are 3-car consists. Well, technically 2-car with the locomotive, but 3 vehicles in total, and in this case it is of course a 3-car unit. Yes, I've just remembered with the emergency brake on this thing is a nightmare, because once you've activated it, once you've applied the emergency brake, it's pretty much, well, I tried it the other night and it is seemingly impossible to reset the brake, and which is absolutely infuriating to say the very least. And we're on the move again, a minute and a half early, which is why I'm only accelerating very, very slowly, because I think if I tried going straight up to line speed, that instruction there, it's like wait until 10:35, that probably wouldn't clear until I was past the next platform, and then the instructions would be glitched, and then it'd probably be impossible to finish the run. Trying to get a shot there, a screenshot there of the train passing by that little river band and the narrow gauge line. I don't know where this line goes, of course, but I know that we're about to we're approaching what is essentially the eastern end of the line at Freital Hainsberg. And as you can see, the narrow gauge line is dipping down a bit. It looks like it goes under the standard gauge line. That's curious. The fan on the leading coach is spinning, and yet the one in the middle coach is completely okay. The fans on each end are spinning, and yet the one in the middle coach is completely static. Incidentally, if anyone who lives in Dresden in real life happens upon this video, feel free to let us, and if you use the S-Bahn, feel free to let us know in the comments what it's like. I can imagine it being quite fascinating. Just again because of the fact that I'm so used to seeing multiple units on these kinds of surfaces instead of locomotive hauled coaches. I think I've got the stopping point slightly wrong. No, I haven't. I think I might actually get out and have a quick look around the platform. Of course, there's the narrow gauge coaches again. Those consists don't change throughout the day or anything. It's I mean, especially since that Dovetail didn't bother modelling any narrow gauge locomotives, thanks. And yeah, those are literally just static models. They just sit there in the sidings all day. And I think 2 more stations down the line at Freital Potschappel, you'll see more narrow gauge coaches. Although from what I gather, the narrow gauge line out of Potschappel actually closed a few years ago. But this one as far as I know in real life, this line out of Freital Hainsberg is still running. Let's have a quick look at the destination displays to see what other services are going through here anytime soon. Okay, 1052 S3 to Tharandt. What would be the next service after this one? It's just looks like it's S3 services stopping here all day. And I'm guessing that they would only need to have that for most of the day, if not the whole day. They could just Deutsche Bahn could just use have 2 consists assigned to this service. Mainly like for the off-peak. I mean, because in that case it is possible to complete a round trip to Tharandt in under an hour. So that means that you could still maintain the half-hourly service if you had 2 consists running. I dare say that when they extend it to Freiburg-Sachs in the peak period, they would have to bring in more, or a few more trains to help keep the service up. Anyway, so now we're leaving Freital Hainsberg West, and it should be fairly short distance to Freital Deuben. Right. I think on average the stations on this section are only about 1,500 metres apart, which is really quite close. And then again, it's something I'm certainly used to with these German routes. It's quite often you'll find that they've got these services where there's a sizable number of station stops over a relatively short distance, and it's partly because the stations are so close together. Even on the main line. Like, I'm especially used to seeing this sort of thing on light rail or metro or underground or tram services. In particular, the Frankfurt U-Bahn, or I believe it's actually pronounced as U-Bahn. And that's quite a curious system because it's a mix of underground operation. It's a mix of underground sections with sort of street running, like where you're running in between the road, but the U-Bahn is on its own right of way instead of the rails being built into the road surface. And you've got all that as well as sort of almost rural, or like sort of what feels like a conventional line out in the countryside. Like in particular when you're driving along lines I think just lines U2, U3, U8 and U9. The others are all just, they all just feel very, like you're in a very busy and built up area. Right, well now that we're getting ready, now that we're leaving Freital Deuben, that means we've only got 2 more intermediate stops. And with any luck, we should get to Dresden Hauptbahnhof at least a minute early. Think about it. I'm wondering if I should just. Well, no, I think I will avoid going straight to full power on this section. And given that we're so early, it means that you can just meander along and go at a relatively low speed. Because I wouldn't really want to end up speeding along for that instruction to clear and then counting down a distance to go to the next stop marker as you're like not even 100 metres from it, and then it would be a pretty embarrassing mistake. Yes, it's one thing you'll certainly find a lot of on this Dresden to Chemnitz route is the steep gradients. Like, as you can see on the HUD there, we're going down 1 and 71, but on other parts of the route, in particular between Tharandt and Freiburg-Sachs, you can get gradients as steep as about 1 in 41, which is incredibly steep by railway standards. And it wouldn't be, I don't think it's as much of a problem for road vehicles, but for a railway or for trains and locomotives it is a different experience, because it's partly, and I think it's to do with the limited friction or grip, because it's metal, because you've got metal on metal, so metal wheels on metal rails. But then again, adhesion for the most part on a train doesn't seem to be too bad. But what I'm saying is that steep hills or gradients like 1 in 40 are a lot more demanding for a train than they are for a car. Anyway, here is Freital Potschappel, which has what looks like a nice, almost sort of old-fashioned canopy. Kind of like what I remember seeing back at Dresden Plauen. Of course, I'm just using the Y and U keys to open and shut the doors. It's, once you get your head around it, it's fairly easy to remember. So, I have in all the times I've driven this particular variant of the Talent 2, I have never noticed that it says Saxonia Express on the side. So that, yeah, obviously that means that this particular variant is optimised primarily for regional express services throughout the state of Saxony. So, again, I'm a bit confused as to why Dovetail scripted it so that you could select it for S-Bahn duties in timetable mode, but at least it means it's theoretically possible to actually complete the round trip without any silly game-breaking glitches. Why that seems to happen with the BR442 as well, I have no idea. Anyway, the next stop, of course, is Dresden Plauen, and after that it's Dresden Hauptbahnhof. Surprised that the Talent 2 is making pretty light work of this run, since they're quite capable units. Any glitchy camera though, which is something I've experienced before, and I don't know why Dovetail hasn't gotten around to fixing it. Or they probably don't see it as important. Or maybe they think that they're not going to make money from it. Well, they won't, but even then they should still fix it. Goes another train heading out towards Obviously I'm not going to like use the free run camera to go back and look at it at a consist, but I'm guessing it was another S3 service heading back out to Tharandt. And of course that consist that we saw with the cab car and the BR143, that, as I've said so many times, that is the prototypical consist. I suppose in some ways it's good that you can also use the Talent 2 on this run. Although I think for full length runs of this route I'd probably try either like the BR612 again or like an RB30. Except with RB30 it's the same consist as the S3. Anyway, obviously trying to slow down to the 70 speed limit in time, which I should make. I wonder if we'll ever see any other variants of the Talent 2 in TSW again. There's one particular variant I wouldn't mind seeing is the 5-car National Express BR9442. I think you could use that on... I'm pretty sure they run between Wuppertal and Hagen in real life, so you could use them on... So Dovetail could make it as an add-on for like Rhine-Ruhr Osten. Although I dare say it wouldn't happen unless they got sorted out a licensing agreement with National Express. Although from what I just remembered, another potential route they could do is like Koblenz to Trier. So I did find out yesterday that in real life the DU's Talent 2 is on that route, which is curious because if I'm not mistaken there's actually 2-car Talent 2s in use on the Koblenz to Trier route, and I think they also run with either 4 or 5-car variants as well. Anyway, here's perhaps the most vintage or old-fashioned looking station on the route. It is Dresden Plauen. Once again trying to make sure I get the stopping point exactly right. I'm a bit fussy about this, even though I suppose it doesn't necessarily matter, as long as you can still stop in the station and passengers can still get off or get on and off the train as they're doing now. Not sure what that hiss was about. Might be something to do with the brakes. Speaking of which, I wonder if anyone's ever had a cab ride in a Talent 2. Although I can't imagine they'd do that sort of thing all that often in Germany, if at all. Right, now we're pretty much on the home straight, finally. As I said, I was looking through the list of timetable mode services earlier before I started this run, and I did see that I'd been able to complete a run from Tharandt back to Dresden Hauptbahnhof, and it must have been with this Talent 2. So, again, fingers crossed that that we'll pull it off again today. And I think once I've done this run, I'm not sure what TSW route I'll cover next. If anything, it'll probably just... I'm thinking I'll perhaps revisit the Long Island Railroad or something of that nature. Not entirely sure. Possibly even the Peninsular Corridor or Caltrain routes. The problem with driving Caltrain though is that, especially if you want to do a full run from San Francisco all the way to San Jose, that usually takes at least an hour and a half, depending on what sort of stopping pattern you go for. So I think it's the Baby Bullet services that cover that 47-mile section in just a little bit over an hour. But if you go for like limited stop or local services, that increases the journey time quite substantially. Though I will say that the TSW2 version of the Caltrain routes is an awful lot better than the older Train Simulator version. Despite the fact that, for whatever reason, the TSW2 version does not include the section from the extra section from San Jose to Gilroy. So I think it is quite disappointing that Dovetail decided not to bother adding that extra, I think, 30 miles. So it would have made it a little bit more interesting, even though there's only like 6 trains a day that cover that whole section. Like 3 northbound in the morning and 3 southbound in the afternoon. That's it. It's weird, I just heard a substantial drop in the noise. Don't think it's the neutral section. Steep incline, of course it's 1 in 50, and I think the reason why it's such a steep descent is, well, obviously it looks like we're going under another track, which I don't think is part of the main line to Riesa, but what do I know? All I know is that at this end of Dresden Hauptbahnhof, at least, it is, you do get the complicated track work that is commonly associated with big terminus, or the approach to big terminus stations, especially here in Germany. Of course, in New Zealand, I think you've sort of got that system that's kind of set up as well, but only, I think, only in Wellington. Because I think Wellington railway station is the last place in the country that truly feels like a big city, a big terminus in the centre of a city. But it's a busy terminus, I should add. I mean, there's Britomart in Auckland, but the approach into that station is nowhere near as complicated as Wellington. For one thing, well, because the approach into Britomart is a double track underground tunnel, and then the station itself has 5 platforms. Wellington, on the other hand, I think it's got like 4, possibly probably 6 or 7 or 8 approach tracks, and that station has 9 platforms. So there's a lot more going on, and despite the fact that Wellington's not as densely populated as Auckland, I feel like there's a lot more going on at Wellington Station than there is at Britomart. And at long last, we're finally arriving back at Dresden Hauptbahnhof. Yes, I think I know now to not use, or to actually use less authentic motive power if I just want to do a Dresden to Tharandt round trip. I mean, at least the Talent 2 is a good unit to drive. And we're still on time. And another BR442. Wonderful. So yes, now that we've wait, what? I pressed the wrong key. Let's do F1. Yes, now that we're finally at the end of our run, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Dresden S-Bahn again. And I invite you to stick around for future videos like this coming soon, or whatever else I can think of. But yeah, until next time, take care everyone, and yeah, I guess I'll see you down the line, pun intended. Also, don't forget to check out that comparison video I did with the TS and TSW versions of the Talent 2. But yeah, for real this time, goodbye, and thank you for watching.